Welcome to the Cherish and Conquer podcast, the show dedicated to celebrating female entrepreneurs' strength, resilience, and innovation. Be inspired by stories of women and what they cherish to help them conquer against all odds. Every other week, you will learn from remarkable women on how they navigate challenges, uphold their values, and create sustainable success. And now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Hello and welcome to the Cherish and Conquer podcast. I'm really excited about the conversation that you're going to get the opportunity to either watch or listen to today because I have Amy Vaughan on the show with us today. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So we're going to get a chance to learn how she is actually impacting the lives of the people that she's working with today and the things that she's working on, and also hear some of her story. And prior to us actually hitting the record button, there's so much, alignment in regards to our thinking. And I would say almost, looking at the analytics and the statistics, from a marketplace, human behavior perspective, all these things in regards to how do we actually move forward faster. And I'm really looking forward to that. But before we do get into all of those details and that exploration, if you could share with listeners and watchers, what are you working on today that's impacting the lives of the people who you're touching?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me here, Jim. I'm really excited, and I agree. We've got a lot of things that are in alignment. I would say the ways right now in which I'm able to sort of help women in breaking barriers is through our community that we have built Together Digital. It's a national network of women who work in digital marketing and advertising, as well as technology. And, I think it's been really interesting. It's been a curious evolution, thanks to the thing that impacted many of us, which was COVID. Before COVID, we were very much an in-person networking organization, very traditional, monthly, quarterly events, national conference, in-person panels, in-person networking. And then COVID hit. And now my life and my work looks very different. I spend a lot of my time here in these little circles and boxes on our online community. And it's kind of interesting because now I still show up in person. Thank you again to science and medicine. I can be back in person with others and in community with others in person. But because of technology, I'm able to show up and support women virtually as well. And we do that in a number of ways, whether that's through our Slack conversations, where we have a closed Slack community for our members where they can ask for what they need without guilt or without shame. And we give without judgment. And the things that we talk about are pretty tremendous in the sense of both being personal and professional trials and tribulations. The insights, the information, the data, the numbers that we share are real. The experiences that we share are deep and meaningful. And I have members that will even text me, right? They've got my number. I try to make myself very accessible as well. We have workshops, we have master classes, we have peer groups for job seekers. We have dedicated peer groups that meet both online and offline. So it's kind of one of these weird and interesting ways of the world now in which I kind of feel I can be omnipresent. Speaking of podcasts, I also have a podcast, the Together Digital Power Lounge, which is also another way in which we can extend empowerment to women through inspiration and information by bringing other empowering women into the space and having them share their power and knowledge. So yeah, it's really cool. It's just really interesting how now we have all these opportunities and channels, as we would say, an omnichannel way to empower women kind of in different ways than we ever did before.
Want more insights from female entrepreneurs? Get complimentary access to Marina's Army for additional tips, tools, and tactics from this episode. Just go to Marina.ai and click Community for access. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Well, and it's kind of interesting. I think it's important for us to kind of, think about this whole even anthropological aspects of community where we are today. Because I tell my kids all the time. I said, especially when they want to get self-absorbed in their devices, and I'm like, how long you been messing on that darn thing, right?
Yeah.
Let's look at your actual usage time.
Hmm.
And actually, I think there was a piece today, this morning in
Yeah.
national news talking about digital addictions and stuff yet again.
Hmm.
Um, is that, you know, not having the opportunity to be in community.
Hmm.
And if you think, social media as a whole is community, can
Hmm.
be problematic if that's your thinking. But
Sure.
but but if we look at what the internet overall was built upon and why we
Hmm.
do have some of the things we have, it is community.
It
And
is.
so if we go back tens of thousands of years, if we didn't have community back then, we would not.
Hmm. Yeah,
We would
it
not
is
be.
an absolute balance. It is an absolute balance. I think there's like a healthy approach, right, to community and online and social media and digital usage. I think that's maybe the benefit that we're going to have here over the next 5, 10 years is like a lot of us, older millennials, Gen Zers, or just sorry, Gen Xers, we were inundated, right? We were fascinated, we were drawn into it and maybe overdosed a bit on it, right? Because it was new, it was fresh, it was exciting, and we didn't understand the implications of kind of getting too involved in it. And now we're starting to see the data and the research and the studies behind sort of overusage, how it perpetuates perceived isolation, which we also know based on Surgeon General data can create like a shortened lifespan by up to 15 years, can be the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we've seen kind of the dark side, right, of what community, not community, but what sort of social media and digital overuse in the wrong ways can be. But what I'm hoping is that what we can start to see is like this evolution over the next, decade and a half or so is that, these tools, these online opportunities. I think another great example is things like I'm trying to think of the name of it, but all of these online mental health tools that we've got, right? There's a Better Health or Better Talk or whatever that is, where you can find resources to do like talk therapy online, creating more accessible things like that online, finding community for women who maybe are working from home remote, like our community Together Digital, where if you're working from home and you're a working mom and you are working remotely, you don't have a sense of community connection, company culture. Like we've become that for a lot of women. And I think that that's an amazing evolution of what online community and platform has become over the last few years. And I would love to kind of see more of that. So I realize that there's a lot of shade and hate kind of thrown at social media because there's that whole comparison spiral. There's a lot of negativity in the space. There's a lot of opportunity for, hate speech to perpetuate and whatnot. But then there's also a lot of opportunity for good. It really just depends on how we choose to use the tool, in my
Yeah, I mean,
opinion.
that's a great point. And even when we start talking about artificial intelligence and things like that, so Myrna has a community of users and non-users. I mean, you take it to a much bigger level.
Hmm.
So I mean, we're in there having discussions about things that are financial, work
Hmm.
life, balance. And
Yeah.
so Myrna's Army is a place that people can see where it's not just about a software that's geared towards women and content creation and marketing and adding the capabilities
Hmm.
from a sales perspective. It's if we don't have this connection as people
Yeah.
focused in on one thing and
Hmm.
augmenting AI, to have a
Hmm.
better output, augmenting all the social media tools that are available to us in order
Hmm.
to build more connection and community.
Yeah.
We do get lost.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
too easy
You're
to
right.
get lost.
Yeah. Intentionality is important. It's the difference between, building something to take power from versus power to. Whether it's a tool like AI versus like digital community building, things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
So I love that. And I think also too, because I still hear it over and over again, people start talking about, well, yeah, I have a private Facebook group. I
Mhm.
don't want Facebook to own my community. I just don't.
Yeah, yeah, I feel you there. It is one of those things where it's not having your own private proprietary space sometimes is kind of a challenge and difficult and worrisome. We've had an interesting kind of journey in that space as well, trying to kind of we've got a really active and sustained community within Slack, and it was recently bought by Salesforce, not maybe 2 years ago, right? Yeah, and it's definitely sort of changed. It's not changed terribly much, thankfully. As far as like a user experience goes, I think some updates and things like that have gone a little bit slower. But really kind of getting or having our members consider moving to anything else, even though they're women in digital, it's hard, getting people to kind of consider moving or switching platforms. We adopted that platform back in 2016, long before it was very prevalent and pervasive within sort of the day-to-day. But because of COVID, and now it's much more adopted because more people are working remote and hybrid. So folks are way more used to using it. So yeah, we're kind of sticking with it for now.
And I like the for now because it's that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
It's I think a lot of it becomes familiarity.
Absolutely.
I'm used to using that, and it becomes cruise control, and I don't even have to think about it.
Right.
I think
it's an important part of community building is really knowing where your people are and where they want to be. I mean, I do volunteer for a number of other community groups and builders where they do try to create and build their own platforms. And then they're like, use our space. And it's really because ultimately their goal is not to create the best user member experience. It is because they want to own and collect like the data, and ultimately like the members and the users kind of know that in the back of their minds. And if they're not building with the full intentionality of creating the best ultimate user experience, and it's just about having their own proprietary like access to first and third party data, even if they're not marketers, like they're going to kind of sniff that out, in my opinion. And so unless you're building something that has just really like beneficial user like benefits, you're going to have a hard time moving people. If you're kind of somebody that's listening right now that's working on kind of fostering, growing, building a community, you just really got to be smart about what you're building and creating and hosting that community on. So I do understand like why people do close Facebook groups, because if that's where your audience is, that's where they're going to go. That's the app that they have open day in and day out. If that's your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and that's where they're at. So it is a bit of a common struggle when you're dealing with and building communities.
I think you hit it on a crucial component and point. And I would dare to say that oftentimes this may even differ between the genders, is that it's about the user experience, the member experience, and that has to be top of mind. And then, hey, the benefit on the analytics and data piece, is just icing on that particular cake. It's when you flip it and it becomes, all about the data and first party data. That, I mean, if that's your primary driver and motivator, it's going to be a short-term activity.
Yeah. I mean, not to throw shade, but I would say a lot of my members within our organization talk a lot about LinkedIn anymore and how it's really not a space that they prefer to be on.
Yeah.
A lot of the updates, a lot of the changes, it's really skewed more towards people who want to pay to like elevate their profiles, who want to pay to use like the sales navigator aspect of it. It's really more about paying to play versus really networking, connecting, and community than where it was before. And they're more deterred to be on the platform than they ever were before. And they're using it less and less.
Well, I mean, shareholders have to be paid.
Yeah.
Involved for that, but also.
Well, it's the long game versus the short game, right? Ultimately as well. Because it's like in the short term, you're going to pay your shareholders in the short term, but what does this look like over time, over the next 5-10 years, as slowly but surely you start to lose your users, especially when 50% of those users are women.
That's always been the dilemma, right? It's, meeting the short-term shareholder needs. And this is why it's so difficult for a lot of people to take on, investors, because then it becomes a scenario of, okay, are you hitting your marks? Are you hitting your numbers? Are you hitting? And that's where some of the, I guess you'd say fun starts coming, going away from the business. Yeah. So I love to cook, for example. And people are like, oh, you should open a restaurant. You should open a restaurant. I said, that would make cooking not fun anymore.
Right? Absolutely not.
There's no way I want to do that. So it's, you have to make the determination. So I would love to hear what actually inspired you to start your own business, and how does it align with Cherish and Conquer?
Yeah, it's a funny question to always answer because I'm not the founder of the organization. Somebody once kind of framed it back for me and said, "You're just a refounder," which I appreciated. And I'm a bit of an accidental entrepreneur. So I started my career out in marketing and advertising. I was a creative director, working for mostly Fortune 500 companies and large digital marketing and advertising agencies for about 15 years. And I joined an organization then called Women in Digital because I was a working mom of one 3-year-old and another impending baby on the way. And just very much realizing that I was kind of facing that common motherhood penalty of, oh, is she going to prioritize her job the same? And oh, when she comes back from having the baby, she's not going to want to travel. So this whole account that she just busted her hump to help to win, we're not going to bother putting her on it because she's not going to want to travel, but we're not going to bother to ask her while she's on leave. And still working, the crazy hours and, not really seeing anyone else that looked and was living through the things I was kind of living through and experiencing in the room like me. Not having any mentors alongside me that, were other working women and moms. I had a ton of great, amazing male allies and champions, fortunately, that really helped me along, but it just felt very isolated for a time there. And I was approached by the founder of then Women in Digital. We eventually changed the name and evolved into Together Digital in 2018. And she told me her story and experience where she had been told by a creative director of hers, a boss at the time, that he couldn't be alone in a room with her because he didn't know what would happen. So, yeah. Super lovely. Thank God I never had to go through something like that. But that was just really disheartening for her because she really valued his opinion, respected him, looked up to him. It was very soul crushing. And then to just make matters worse, when she approached HR, their resolution was to put her on a different team. And she's like, that won't do. And then, he continued to try to talk to her and like smooth things over with like money and apologies and presents. And she's like, this is not cool, and just left. And just kind of found that it just continued to be a theme wherever else she went. So she started her own agency. And then kind of, I think actually the gentleman after about 10 years passed away, and she felt comfortable sharing the story because she never really wanted to bring shame to his name and what happened. But she finally shared this story, and she never named the guy, but told this story at this kind of like tell-all stand-up session where she didn't expect anyone to show, and like 130 women showed up, and they were all like, yeah, this sounds very familiar. And this is in 2016, so right at the cusp of the Me Too movement. And it really kind of sparked that conversation of, how do I create a safe space for women to talk about the things both personally and professionally that they're dealing with, so that we can sort of work through these personal things that it seems really hard to be able to talk about in the workspace, that maybe we can't even go home and talk about, but we can talk about here. And then we can also, in the meantime, talk about all of this amazing work that we love to do in digital, and help to move each other forward by sharing our knowledge, our power, our connections, doing what we call our ask and give exchange. So she just created this really amazing movement and opportunity for women in our field. So I was very compelled to join. I had been trying to create a women in leadership group at my agency. I had joined a couple of 3% conferences in the East and West Coast that were started by Kat Gordon, that kind of highlighted the fact at the time that only 3% of creative directors were women in marketing and advertising, which was kind of amazing because 80% of the buying power are women. So only 3% of the people crafting those messages directed to that audience are women. At the time, that number's, I think, closer to 15% now. So, woo, getting there.
That's right. It's partial impact.
Right. It's climbing slowly but surely. And so, I think it was just one of these things where I always sort of was kind of following this passion, this purpose. Once, like you were saying, once you sort of start to hear and know the numbers, it's kind of like, once you see it or learn it, you can't unsee it, right? And so even though I wasn't a victim of any sort of sexual harassment or blatant sexual discrimination in my workplace, I saw and heard plenty of it going on around me. And so it just sort of became an opportunity for me to be able to share the statistics, talk about the opportunities for growth, the things that I was learning, and help to educate allies and leadership around me. And so when she came to me and told me about Women in Digital, Together Digital, I really had no time. I was busy. I was caretaking for my mom. I was raising a young daughter, about to have a second. And while I have an amazing partner at home who does loads, very like equal shared at home, still very busy. But I felt, this is something that I need for myself. This is something I feel others must need. And so I helped start Cincinnati chapter in early 2017, right after I had my son. And I was president of the Cincinnati board for about 2.5 years. And then after I was about to step away from that, thinking I'm just going to enjoy being a Together Digital member for once and like show up to events and just kind of chill and whatnot. Got approached by the founder, and she asked if I would step in and run the business for her while she ran for Congress. A member had approached her who did digital marketing campaigns for congressional candidates and said, "You have what it takes. Like, you need to do this." And she kind of did the same thing for me. I had told her that I wanted to do more ops type work. I wanted to be running a business potentially. I never really thought I would be owning and running a business, but I wanted to be in that kind of a role. And she looked at me and said the same thing. And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier before we hopped on here, of the power of community and connections, is that's the opportunity, is that people see the potential in you and give you the chances that others might not. And so for her to do that for me was tremendous. I was thrust into the deep end in 2019, November. So right before the pandemic, became the acting CEO. COVID hit in March. She's off running for Congress, which if any of you listening have done this, is pretty all consuming. So I was kind of off and running, trying to figure things out as we went. But super proud of how we were able to sort of kind of right the ship in the way of like operations and finances to really just kind of get the business to a point where we could still show up for our members, really honestly like 10x our content and increase member value, show up wherever they were virtually while, the pandemic was happening, but then also really evaluate how we were showing up in person once we came back after COVID. Eventually became partner in the business and then bought the business at the end of 2021. So here I am, like shifted from an entire career path of being an agency kid for 15 years into owning and running a business. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. Never would have imagined 5 years ago that this is where I'd be. But hey, that's the power of connections and community. Be amazed where it gets you. You follow your passion and your purpose, and it might just land you the opportunity of your dreams.
Okay, so I think it's really, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's an amazing journey. Like you said, I didn't see it coming, but you were open to it,
yeah.
Right? And you had the the exploration interest,
Mm-hmm.
and to not close a door because of some type of feeling you may had, or whether it's feeling a lack of experience and
Mm-hmm.
and skill,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times people are like, "Hey, I'm not going to undertake that. I've never done that before," right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be interested to know how, as these things were hitting you, went about and were able to find clarity,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can actually step into that with
Mm-hmm.
your whole self.
Well, I love it because I realized I didn't answer the last part of your last question, which was how does it align to Cherish and Conquer? I knew that Together Digital and the mission and the values aligned so well with everything that I had been putting. Like, again, I had such little time and such little energy left to put in. But every time I showed up to anything like a board meeting or a Together Digital event, like I left more energized. I cherished everything about this group community, its missions and its values. That's exactly how I was able to kind of go in and conquer those years over COVID and say that, yeah, I mean, I'm going to be figuring this out as I go, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to conquer it because I just care about it that much. I think I see the impact that it has in big and small ways, and it's really worth it. Does that mean that I wasn't scared, you know, half the way, like all like, and I didn't want to quit a bunch of different times? I would be lying if I said I didn't. But what really kept me going a lot of the times was sort of falling back on a lot of my most valued and trusted advisors. I cite this a lot, my disagreeable givers. I love Adam Grant. He's an organizational psychologist out of Wharton University. If you guys haven't heard about him or read any of his work, one of his books is called Give and Take. He has this quadrant of people, and one of those groups within that quadrant are your disagreeable givers. So people who will kind of tell you, also another great book, Radical Candor, Kim Scott, will tell you with clear but kind what you need to hear. And they're not saying it because they want to take anything from you or that they want to be overly agreeable, because you feel like you're agreeable givers, the people that will always tell you, what you want to hear. It's like your mom, right? Is probably your most common agreeable giver. And, so my disagreeable givers, people who really told me what I, needed to hear in the clearest but most kind way. I have to give some credit to my husband, and my mentors, who really knew sometimes what I wanted before I could realize I wanted it, and didn't tell me what I wanted, but knew what questions to ask me to help me come to the right conclusions. And I think that was really helpful. The community itself, I think that's another beautiful thing about owning and operating a business that is about empowerment and community, is like what you give is what you get, showing up and not being like a hot mess, but being a little vulnerable and making sure that you model what you want them to do, in the sense of saying, if I need help, I'm going to ask for it because I want you to be willing to ask for help. It's great. They understand, like, you're human too, like being approachable, asking for help. Those things I think have really, really, really helped me get through a lot of self-awareness. I mean, I joke and say there's nothing like owning a business just to get your butt kicked. And it really shows you sort of all of the gaps and the holes within yourself, because when you work for someone else, right, it's so easy to just go home and like bitch and moan about, oh, this is wrong and this isn't great and this is going bad. But when it's you and you're the one running the business, like if you're not willing to self-reflect and take the time to be self-aware and see where the gaps are, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses within yourself and within your business, you're not going to last long. So I think that was another thing, was really learning how to be more self-aware, self-reflect, and sort of see where my gaps, my strengths, and my weaknesses were, and really kind of take time to assess and address those where needed.
So as you're talking, I start thinking about going through the exploration to find solid footing and solid ground, so I kind of know where I stand. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say. And then part of that is, me coming to my own conclusions, like you're talking about, and then also having those disagreeable givers.
Yeah.
And being willing to accept those things and not respond to them. I think oftentimes, and I get caught into the trap as well, is when I have a disagreeable giver, I want to immediately hit that with, yes, but, yes, and I have to stop doing that and get my butt out of the way. I need to take that in and maybe not necessarily respond at that given moment of time.
Yes.
Go back and figure out the questions, and I need to ask back to get better clarity and understanding and perspective. That's kind of, for me, I got to find that solid footing so that I make a move instead of standing in place, and then also that I'm making the correct move.
Yeah. I think it's very much the difference between confidence and ego, in my opinion. I think like understanding and trusting your own knowing, but always being willing to learn and fail and learn from your mistakes and move on, like that's confidence. It's like I could fall flat on my face and I can get up, laugh about it and be like, you know what? I just learned something. Like to me, that's confidence. Ego is falling flat on your face and getting mad at everyone else and the whole world around you about it, and then making a big fit and then not learning anything from it and then dusting yourself off and trying to act like it didn't even happen. And I really, just kind of have never really been in love with the idea of being far down the path of ego versus just genuine confidence and knowing myself. And I think knowing myself means knowing I don't know everything, and that's okay.
And most definitely. Okay, so I think it's important for us to get into and understand the difference between what is, community and having community and building community versus oftentimes we hear networking. And because I think a lot of times people put those two things together and it creates, a problem for both. We need both. I think, it's kind of like, for me, if it's almost thinking like stage, like, okay, one stage is, home theater. The other stage is big screen. And I behave a little bit differently. So what are some of your, perspectives and thoughts on, community and then.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you've asked. I'm just going to think aloud as I go to answer this because I'm not exactly sure. I think that networking to me is the beginnings of community. I think networking is the dating that happens before you bring someone into community. So sometimes, because when we're networking, it's sometimes looking to see if there's a right fit for opportunity for collaboration, for sharing opportunity, and I think in order for us to feel that we are okay with sharing certain things, we have to feel like we trust and respect that person. And I think that I think networking gets a bad rap too, though, personally. I really want to come up with a different word for networking, especially for women and those who are in the minority space or underrepresented groups, because and I'm sure that men probably feel this way too. It sometimes just feels dirty. It feels transactional. It doesn't feel intentional. But I think it has a lot of power to it. I think that if, we were to shift our mindset about it a little bit, like I said, especially women and those who are underrepresented, there's a lot of opportunity within it. So right now I'm working on a book that talks about the networking gap and really how, because women really do avoid and underutilize networking because of the lack of time. And honestly, when you ask them more than once, like, okay, really, why don't you network? When after they say time, they say fear of rejection. Or they don't want to have to self-promote because from a societal standpoint and how we've been conditioned, we are told not to self-promote. That doesn't look good on you, kind of a thing. And so, helping us sort of learn how to break up and make up with networking is kind of the goal of this book, to sort of help folks really sort of embrace that opportunity on how to leverage your connections to move yourself further, faster. And to me, that's what networking is. Community is like that bigger evolution of, now I've built this tremendous network of people and we are in community in the sense that we're all working towards a bigger goal together. So like when I talk about Together Digital, I have a hard time just calling it a network. It is a community. Like these women know and trust and respect and value one another. They are friends. Like these women know a lot about each other, more than just, what do I do for a living? They might know each other's kids' names. They might know partners' names. They kind of know what's going on in the inner workings of their thoughts and their feelings and their minds, their hearts, in their personal lives. So to me, that's like more than networking. But yeah, I think that's how I would answer that. That sufficed.
Well, I mean, okay. So again, I like to take things and try to convert them visually in my head so I can understand them a little bit better. Is that I have to do the networking in order to be able to build a better community.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not continually networking, and I start thinking about the dating app scenario, right?
Yep.
If I'm not actually in there and at least swiping,
Yep.
how do I know who I even want to invite into the community?
Exactly.
So I think, I mean, that totally makes sense. I've got to take the
Hmm.
first step. The first step is networking, and then it evolves into
Yes.
something that's broader and much
Hmm.
deeper.
Yep. Yeah, networking is the dating that predates the whole, like, yeah. Are we a fit? I was actually, the word that I was playing with was meshing.
Meshing.
Instead of net, because like a net, right, is like a mesh. And I was like, let's see if we mesh. Like, let's go out and like, let's see if we mesh. Are we gonna like kind of connect? Do we have similar interests, values, goals, or do we have like compatible like skill sets where it's like you're really good at this and I'm really good at that, but that makes us compatible because we have gaps. So that allows for us to collaborate, but we have similar values, which means we're heading towards similar goals or outcomes or desires, which means, yeah, we mesh well. So yeah, we should be in community together, kind of a thing. Because like I said, networking, I think, again, another reason for writing the book, it just feels antiquated. If you look back in the research I've been doing, you know, most of it gets done on the golf course, 18 holes. Not a lot of people feel super comfortable about that. The first book ever really written attributed to networking was written in 1939 by Dale Carnegie, How to Win People, win friends and influence people. Win friends because you can win people, apparently. We are prizes, which just feels like, even in the title, folks are objectified. And even though they've done a great job of creating new additions and sort of trying to update language and things like that, it's just, it was 1939. There's
It
only
was.
so much updating you can do.
Well, in addition, I think, like you were saying too, is from a society perspective, we give it bad raps. And I mean, so it's like, okay, let's look at probably what the true, meaning was of it during that period and picture of time. I think
Mhm.
that's important. And when you said that too, it brings me to think about a particular trap that Dr. Robert Cialdini talks about, who is supposed to be, or who is recognized as the father of the science of persuasion. And because you
Mhm.
even talked about reciprocity, which is one of the things he talks
Yes.
about as well,
Mhm.
being important, is he said the key to liking, and liking is important,
Mhm.
is that we misapply it if we think we have to try to get people to like us. That is a
Yes.
misapplication of liking.
Mhm.
What we really want to do, and this is where it fits into the whole networking and building community, is that people need to know that we like them. That's the
Yes.
power of liking.
Mhm. Yep.
You know, and even when you started talking about the whole disagreeable, contributors,
Givers. Mhm.
givers, is that I need to actually surround myself with those types of people.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
can't, if I avoid them because of the whole ego and the
Mhm.
sensitivity piece, I'm going to be led astray.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. And I realize that looking back now too, that I played the role of disagreeable giver often in my professional life. And I realized that there were people that I always had the best of intentions when I was sharing that feedback, and I was always trying to give it in the most genuine, kind way. And I was always so confused that it wasn't received with the same intentions. And now after reading that book, I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. They weren't in the right mindset maybe to even receive, because again, if you're not really aware of the dichotomy of and the difference, right? If you're kind of always just on the defensive and thinking everyone's a disagreeable taker, then yeah, of course you're going to shirk away from them. Yeah, you're going to avoid the confrontation, even though I'm not a confrontational person. I'm an Enneagram 9, and 9, if you're familiar with those, the Enneagrams. And that's like, I advertently, like, I avoid confrontation usually at all costs. Um, so yeah, it's definitely been, I do this whole, I'm working through, as a part of the exercise in this book, a networking gap exercise. And it is to kind of evaluate the extent of your network, everything from acquaintances, friends, families, past peers, coworkers, etc. And one of the things I tell you to look out for is, yeah, surround yourself with at least 3 to 5 disagreeable givers at any given time, because those are some of the most important connections that you'll have. Those are the people, when things are really going tough, you're going to want to call, because they're the ones that are going to tell you what you really need to hear and not just what you want to hear. And sometimes, and again, it's like with all feedback, it's a gift. And you, like you said too, you need to sit with it and you need to kind of think through it, because it doesn't mean just because they told you it, you need to take it exactly for what it was. It just needs to go into the consideration. But yeah.
Well, there's even a premise. I mean, as you're talking, it reminds me of in the study of positive psychology
Hmm.
that talks about unlikely pairs.
Hmm.
So this is where sometimes community and groupthink, it
Hmm.
can have some negative outcomes to it. Is that
Yep.
if I don't include some people that to me is an unlikely pair, I mean, we don't have the same perspectives. We don't, again, we're going to stifle our creative thinking process.
Hmm.
And for creatives,
Hmm.
that's an issue. So that means if you think about it in context of particular types of work groups, is
Yeah.
like, even if I don't think like an engineer, I better have an engineer as part of my community because they're going to give me a perspective that I can't
Oh,
bring
yeah.
to the table.
Uh-huh. And this is super true too in team building. I mean, I definitely take this into consideration as we're like, not just our community members, obviously, we practice radical acceptance when it comes to like our members that are coming in, as far as like digital is a broad term. These women and folks are also like non-binary and female identifying and neurodivergent and a vast age range and vast difference in like background and experience as well. And I think what that has done is really allowed for us to sort of also look at our team and structure and say, like, as we're kind of bringing folks in, I love to use, it's a site called Crystal Knows. And it sort of takes into account DISC and Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, and a bunch of other those like fantastic personality and whatever you would call them, um, kind of identifiers, and really kind of maps out for you where and how you and them sort of communicate differently to say like, so one of my teammates, Kaylee, when Kaylee likes to have feedback this way, Amy likes to have feedback this way. Amy is motivated by this, but Kaylee is motivated by this. And it also shows like skill sets and sort of where she fills in the gaps that I might have and where I fill in for where she might have. And it really helps us have a more well-rounded team. But then we're also each aware, because we can see each other's profiles, of sort of where each of us sit. And so I have a good understanding of her communication style versus mine, because I think that's something, as having been a creative director in the past, creatives are all so different and they're all motivated so differently. And that was one thing that was really important for me in getting the best out of my team, was knowing that they weren't all motivated the same way I was, and getting to understanding how they were motivated so that I could unlock that was always super exciting for me.
So what you were talking about, I also have been exposed to some of the works associated with the science of motivation.
Mm,
And you're hitting on a lot of the things that they were talking about in regards to employee engagement, employee productivity, why we want to stay in a community. If you
yes.
refer to that as a company culture, and why we don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if we don't explore that,
Mm-hmm.
we end up being part of the performance related issue associated with churn, burn,
Yeah.
constantly filling positions, stagnated growth because, we can't retain skill. I mean, all these things that are detrimental to a company. And
Yep.
so, I mean, awesome insight and information that you've shared, and even talking about your own journey. So I'm curious, can you give a time and an example when you had to stay true to your principles and it led you to a significant achievement or breakthrough in your business?
That's a great question. I think when it came down to buying the business, quite honestly, um, and it really had to do with the fact that the founder was just really in a tumultuous time personally, running for Congress, just an abysmal time and really difficult time. Kind of going through that process, I got a lot of interesting insights to what it's like to be a woman, to try to run as a congressional candidate. And I could not even imagine trying to do that myself. Um, And there was just a lot of friction suddenly between us. And it was really difficult because I found that, here we had been so simpatico and we were kind of building towards something that was supposed to be all about women, championing women. And like, it just kind of felt like everything was falling apart in the midst of COVID on top of that. And I kind of started to come to realize, and this is where that self-awareness came into play. And I mentioned the Enneagram earlier. I had a guest come on. Her name was Denny Tato, or Tato, maybe. Denitato, if anybody wants to look her up. I highly recommend her. She is an Enneagram coach, and she came on as a podcast guest with me. She was recommended by a former agency CFO who's also a friend of mine. And she was super generous and gave me the opportunity to do her evaluation, which is usually a little costly. And I went through the process and learned again of my Enneagram type 9-ness. And what it really did for me was sort of unearth my values as in my leadership style, which I said earlier was kind of non-confrontational. I am a huge practicer of mindfulness and meditation. I don't find a lot of value sort of in I find a lot of value in the fight when it comes to fighting for justice and equality, but not fighting for the sake of fighting, not for the sake of drama. And I just sort of came to a moment when I realized we were just very different people with a little bit of different values, not in the sense of like the organizational values, but just values in the ways in which we kind of came about discussing and problems and working through the business. And that was hard for me, right? Because this required confrontation. And so learning about my 9-ness required me to sort of do what you were saying earlier, which was take a moment, take a breath. So when she would come and want to have a hard conversation and kind of hash it out in that moment, I would just kind of sit and listen and say, okay, I need to go away with this and think and then come back to you, which did not sit well necessarily because that was not her style. But she was great and said, okay, I get this. And it sort of came to this point where it just was like very stressful, and again, we were all under so much pressure at that time. Again, small business, trying to operate under COVID, her running for Congress and dealing with her things. It was just like very contentious all around. And this is that moment I told you where it's like one of my mentors asked me a really great question. So she'd come to me and said, okay, I need to talk to you about maybe like a 90% buyout. And I was just like, I don't know, man, because in the back of my mind, I was like ready to just be done. Honestly, this was one of those points, like I said, I was ready to quit. But deep down, I'm like, I don't want to quit, right? It's Cherish. I want to conquer. I want to stay. I have fought so hard to be here. I have got us through the last year and a half. Like, why would I quit now? And it really took me sort of, again, kind of having a lot of my true values revealed through learning my Enneagram and sort of starting to live them in the sense of knowing how to respond and react in that moment. And my then mentor, Timmy, got on a call with me and he says, Amy, what do you really want? And again, getting past this whole non-confrontational side of me, I said, I want all of it. I want the whole business. I don't want 90%. I want 100%. And he's like, then that's what you need to go back and ask for. And I knew that was going to be hard for her. This was her baby. She started it. She put so much into it. And I, I've always respected that. And so I knew it was going to be a big ask, but it was like, I know this is what I need to do. And so it was really that kind of pivotal moment that I took myself by surprise, I think, by standing up for myself and asking for that 100%. But I do think, like I said, kind of doing that inner work and learning and knowing my values and then having to kind of put them right into exercise versus avoiding the confrontation altogether and just doing the easy thing and walking away. It was all such great timing. So yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that story. That's awesome.
Enjoying the show? After joining Marina's army, subscribe and share the Cherish and Conquer podcast on your favorite platform. Thank you. Now, back to the show.
Okay, so now it's time for our rapid fire segment, our breakthrough blitz. You've actually given us a lot of insight in order for us to be able to break through, but this is our last blitz moment. So are you ready to go through the blitz?
Let's do it.
All right. So what's your favorite productivity tool or app?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh my goodness. Tool or app? Oh my God, I've got so many. Okay, the one I've been using most recently is Reclaim.ai. So it integrates with my Google Calendar, and it basically allows for me to basically put time into my calendar. So if I get an email in and somebody needs something, Reclaim.ai will find time in my calendar in the near future. I give it when it needs to be done. It'll just find time, and I'll say how much time I need, and it puts it on my calendar. So it's like now my inbox is no longer my to-do list. It's my calendar, which I think is amazing.
Well, that sounds amazing. Okay, so what's your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
Oh, I've got a whole host of those too, because like I said, I'm big into mindfulness, rest, and relaxation. I'd say probably reading is my go-to. That's my form of self-care, is reading typically on my porch swing.
If you could have dinner with any female business leader, living or deceased, who would it be?
Oh my gosh, killing me. Oh my goodness. So many. I have to pick one. She's not even really a business owner, but I would say Michelle Obama.
So what's your favorite quote or mantra that keeps you motivated?
Oh my gosh. I keep like a million quotes around me too. See, this is like the choice. Okay. The mantra that keeps me going. I'm no good at rapid fire. This is where I fail. I'm not so rapid at rapid fire. Why are no quotes coming to me? This is like when somebody asks me to tell a joke. I'm like, I've forgotten every joke I've ever heard just now. And I have a million quotes around me all the time. And now I'm like, now I remember not a single quote, but I always have them around me. It's probably one of my mindfulness ones, is that the bad news is nothing lasts forever. The good news is nothing lasts forever. So the idea of impermanence helps make everything a little bit easier, as morbid as it might sound.
That's good. What's one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring female entrepreneurs?
Do it. Like, it's never going to happen unless you try. Do it, and then just surround yourself with support, because you're going to need it. You don't need to do it alone.
So what's the biggest misconception people have about being a female entrepreneur, and how do you address it in your own experience?
That it's a hobby. I think women, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, so is this like your full-time job? Yes, it's my full-time job. And yes, I put a lot of time, energy, and effort into it. How do I address it? I just try to model the hard work that I do and that I put into it. And I try to demonstrate not just the success, but also the strife that comes along with it, because I think this whole perpetuating success without strife is not healthy either. So, yeah.
Amy, Vaughan, awesome conversation and insight and experiences
Thanks,
shared.
Jim.
I appreciate that. How do the listeners and watchers of Cherish and Conquer get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So I know I kind of dogged on LinkedIn earlier, but it is still a great networking platform. So until there's something better, I'm there. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Amy P. Vaughan, Vaugha, and there's a sneaky extra A in there for those of you who aren't watching on screen. You can also just email me, amy@togetherindigital.com. Reach out if you have questions about the organization, if you just want to chat. I keep Tuesdays and Thursdays almost as like open office hours for potential members, existing members, women who just want to network. Yeah, that's a great way too.
Amy Vaughan, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for tuning into the Cherish and Conquer podcast from Marina. Join our community of trailblazing women at community.mirina.ai and get access to exclusive resources, checklists, and guides. If you found value in today's episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it across your social platforms. See you soon, and remember, barriers are for breaking.